The shot came between heartbeats. One moment the soldier was moving, crouched low, guiding a woman and two children through the evacuation corridor. The next, he dropped. No cry, no stumble, just a clean collapse into the white. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter pressed flat against the rooftop. Her scope swept the ridgeline. Nothing. Only snow and wind and the gray silence of a village that had forgotten what peace felt like. "Where are you?" Wind shifted. 200 meters northeast, a flock of starlings exploded from a pine cluster. Sudden, panicked, wrong. Her radio crackled. Jack Doyle's voice came low and measured, the way it always did when he already knew something bad. "Emily." She didn't answer. She was already adjusting her scope. "You're not hunting him." The wind died for exactly 1 second. "He's hunting you." The village had no name on any current map. It appeared on older ones, Soviet-era surveys, hand-drawn and faded, as Miroshka, a logging settlement that had died sometime in the 1980s when the timber company pulled out and took every working-age man with it. What remained was a skeleton. 14 structures still standing. 6 collapsed under decades of snowfall. One church with a bell tower that leaned slightly east, as if listening for something coming from that direction. The Alaskan backcountry had swallowed it almost completely. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter had been lying on the church roof for 4 hours. She did not move. She did not shift her weight. She breathed in slow, controlled cycles. 4 counts in, hold 2, 6 counts out. The same rhythm her first sniper instructor had drilled into her at Fort Benning 7 years ago. Your heartbeat is the enemy of accuracy. Learn to slow it down or learn a different job. She had learned to slow it down. Her Mark 21 precision sniper rifle sat on its bipod, the barrel angled toward the eastern tree line. The suppressor was wrapped in white cloth to break its silhouette. Her ghillie suit, modified for Arctic conditions, panels of white and pale gray, made her part of the rooftop. From 200 meters, even with optics, she would be nearly invisible. Nearly. Below her, the evacuation corridor moved in quiet pulses. Every 8 to 12 minutes, a small group emerged from the northeastern tree line. Never more than 6 people at a time, always guided by one of the Army escort soldiers in white painted kit. They moved fast and low across the open ground between the tree line and the first row of standing structures, where a forward aid station had been established in what used to be a general store. 43 refugees had passed through in the last 3 hours. Families mostly, women with children pressed against their sides. A few elderly men who moved with the careful deliberateness of people whose joints had been punished by decades of cold. One young man with a bandaged left hand who kept looking back toward the tree line as if he expected something to follow him out of it. Emily watched all of them. She cataloged their movement speeds, their stress responses, the way they scanned their surroundings. It was habit, the same way a carpenter notices the grain of wood in a table, or a mechanic listens to the specific pitch of an engine. She processed human movement the way other people process language, automatically, constantly, without effort. The wind came in from the northwest, 7 to 9 miles per hour, variable. She made the adjustment in her head and held it. The escort soldier, Specialist Yates, she had been briefed, cleared the latest group into the aid station and turned back toward the corridor. He rolled his shoulders once, checked his watch. Emily noted the time, 13:47 hours. The next group was late. 14 minutes later, they appeared. A woman with 2 children. One of the children, a girl, maybe 7 years old, was being carried. The woman moved fast, faster than the previous groups, her head down and her free hand gripping the older child's wrist. Yates moved out to meet them. He was 3 steps into the open ground when the shot hit him. The sound reached Emily a fraction of a second later, a flat, suppressed crack that the wind immediately smeared and scattered. By the time she registered the acoustic signature, Yates was already down, face first, arms out, the way people fall when the message never reaches their legs. Emily did not flinch. Her scope was already moving. She swept the ridgeline to the northeast. The obvious shot angle. Nothing. No vapor trail in the cold air. No snow displacement. No silhouette breaking the clean, white line of the ridge. She dropped her scan lower. The tree line at 260 meters. The collapsed structure at the village's eastern edge. The narrow gap between two standing buildings on the north side. Nothing. The woman with the children had frozen in the open. The older child was pulling at her arm. The woman was not moving. "Get down," Emily willed it. "Get down, get down, get—" The woman grabbed both children and dropped behind Yates's body, using it as cover. It was a terrible thing to do, and exactly the right thing to do. Emily kept scanning. She had been a sniper long enough to understand the geometry of a shot that couldn't be found. The round had come from somewhere. It had a vector. That vector pointed back to a position. The position had a person in it. She just couldn't see him. "He's good," she thought. "He's very good." Her radio clicked twice, the check-in signal from the aid station. She clicked back once. "I'm up. I'm watching. Stand by." She went back to scanning. The call came 6 minutes after Yates went down. Emily had relocated from her primary position by then, moved 12 feet north along the rooftop ridge to break any potential bead the shooter might have on her original spot. She was settling into her new angle when the radio chirped, and Jack Doyle's voice came through. "Talk to me, Carter." "1KIA," she said, voice flat. "Specialist Yates. Single round, suppressed, high velocity. Came from the northeast quadrant, but I can't pin the origin point. No visual on shooter. The woman and children are sheltered. Aid station is locked down. Northeast quadrant is 300 meters of ridgeline and a drainage gulch that goes back another 400. I know what it is." A pause. She could hear the low hum of electronics in the background. The Tactical Operations Center where Doyle was running remote coordination. He was 1,200 miles away, at a base in Montana, working off satellite feeds and radio telemetry. He couldn't see what she could see. But in 30 years of sniping in Iraq, Afghanistan, and a dozen places that didn't make it into official records, Jack Doyle had developed a sense for terrain that went beyond topography. "Winds out of the northwest at 7 to 9, he said. "Variable, gusting to 12 on the high side. Then your northeast shot angle is a crosswind shot, 100-meter correction territory. This guy didn't miss Yates by accident. He didn't miss at all. Meaning he's good enough to hold a windage correction at what? 250, 300 meters? Minimum." Another pause. She heard him exhale slowly. "That narrows your population significantly. It narrows it to someone with serious training or serious experience." Keys clicking in the background. "I'm pulling the satellite pass from 40 minutes ago, looking for pre-positioned movement on that ridgeline." A beat. "How are the refugees?" Emily glanced toward the aid station. Through the grimy window, she could see movement. People pressed against the far wall, the medic moving between them. The woman with the children finally separated from Yates's body by two soldiers who had crawled out to retrieve her. "Scared," Emily said. "They'll move again as soon as there's a window. Don't give them a window until you know where this guy is. That's the problem." "Yeah." Doyle's voice carried something she recognized. Not worry exactly, but heightened attention. The way he sounded when he was taking a situation more seriously than he was letting on. "Carter, before the shot, anything unusual? Anything that didn't fit?" She thought back through the 4 hours she had spent watching the corridor. "Drone feed flickered," she said. "Twice. Both times about 90 seconds before a group came through. Signal interference. Could be atmospheric, could be something else." "When was the last flicker?" 17 minutes before Yates went down. Silence on the line. "He was timing them," Doyle said quietly. Emily had already reached the same conclusion. She just hadn't said it out loud yet. "He's been watching the corridor as long as I have," she said. "Maybe longer. Which means he had a preposition before you got there." She looked at the ridgeline again, the clean, white line of it, the way the snow lay undisturbed on the upper slope. Too undisturbed, she thought. After 4 hours of wind, there should be some variation in the drift patterns up there. "Jack," she said, "I think the ridgeline is a decoy." A long pause. "Then where is he?" "I don't know yet." "Find out before dark," Doyle said. "You've got about 90 minutes. She spent the next 40 minutes not looking for the sniper. She looked for what the sniper had touched. This was something Doyle had taught her in her first year of working with him, the concept of negative space. A skilled shooter leaves almost nothing visible, but the environment around a skilled shooter tells a different story. Weight pressed on snow changed its density. A hand steadying against a wall left a smear invisible to the naked eye, but detectable through good glass. Cold air disturbed by a passing body took 12 to 15 minutes to fully restabilize. "Don't look for the man," Doyle had said. "Look for what the man changed." Emily began at the collapsed structure on the eastern edge of the village. Through her scope, she worked the debris field inch by inch. The snow on top of the collapsed timbers was even, except for one section near the northeast corner, where the drift pattern broke in a way that didn't match the wind direction. Something had been there, recently enough that the wind hadn't smoothed it over completely. She marked it and moved on. The gap between the two northern buildings. She had dismissed it earlier as too obvious. A clean sightline, yes, but exposed on three sides. Now she looked at the ground level rather than the gap itself. The snow at the base of the eastern building's corner was compressed in two small ovals. Knee prints. Someone had knelt there, but not to shoot. The angle from that position didn't cover the corridor. It covered the church roof. He was watching me. The realization came cleanly, without panic. She processed it the way she processed all tactical information, as data, not threat. He had been in that gap. He had been studying her position, and then he had moved. She keyed her radio. "Jack, knee prints at the north building gap. Observer position, not shooter position. He was watching my overwatch before he took the shot. He wanted to know where you were before he committed." "Yes. Smart. Very." She paused. "He's not some contractor with a rifle and a day rate. This is trained counter-sniper behavior." "I'm starting to get that picture." More typing. "Carter, I need you to hold your position. I'm seeing something in the satellite data I don't like." "What kind of something?" "The kind I need to verify before I say it out loud." His voice had gone carefully neutral. That particular tone meant the information was either unconfirmed or uncomfortable. Possibly both. "Give me 20 minutes. "I don't have 20 minutes of daylight." 15 then. "Don't move on that ridgeline until I call back." She clicked acknowledgement and went back to scanning. There was a third anomaly she hadn't reported yet. The church bell tower. She could see it in her peripheral vision every time she swept left. The slightly east-leaning tower, its wooden louvers dark against the gray sky. She had been inside the church. She knew the tower had a ladder, accessible from the nave, and that the louvers opened outward on two sides. From the top of that tower, with the right position, you could cover almost the entire village. She had rejected the tower as a sniper position when she first arrived because it was the most obvious elevated structure in the area. Any competent shooter would avoid it for the same reason she had. Too predictable, too exposed if identified. But now she thought about it differently. She had been on the church roof, below the tower, meaning the tower had a direct angle down onto her position. If the knee prints at the north gap were an observation post, a place to verify her location, then the actual firing position might be somewhere that commanded a view of both the corridor and her rooftop simultaneously. She didn't look at the tower directly. She looked at the space around it, the snow on the louvers, the way the shadows fell across the east-facing slats. One of the east-facing louvers was open exactly 2 inches more than the others. She noted it, logged it, did not react. Patience, she heard Doyle's voice in her memory. The man who moves first loses. She settled back into her scope and waited. Doyle called back in 11 minutes. The drone interference, he said. It's not atmospheric. Emily said nothing. Let him continue. There's a jamming signature. Narrow band, directional, low power. The kind of setup that targets a specific drone frequency without broadcasting enough to trigger our electronic warfare alerts. He paused. That's not insurgent equipment, Carter. That's not even standard military issue. That's commercial-grade signal intelligence hardware, custom configured. Who's running it? That's what I'm trying to determine. A pause that felt weighted. There are 3 registered private security contractors operating in the Alaskan backcountry corridor under DoD advisory agreements. 2 of them are doing infrastructure survey work. The third one, another pause, longer. The manifest for the third one is restricted. I can see that it exists. I cannot see what's in it. Restricted by whom? Above my access level. Emily considered this. In 12 years of service, she had run into restricted manifests exactly 4 times. 3 of them had turned out to be sensitive but legitimate. Special access programs, covert unit deployments, that category of classified. The 4th had turned out to be something else entirely. Something that had cost 2 good soldiers their careers when they asked too many questions. Jack, she said carefully, are you telling me someone authorized this operation without full information sharing with the tactical support element? I'm telling you I can't confirm or deny that, he said, because I genuinely don't know. What I can tell you is that a shooter with counter-sniper training and commercial-grade jamming equipment is operating in your AO, and nobody briefed us on him. The wind shifted again, coming more from the north now. She adjusted. The shot on Yates, she said, single round, clean kill. He could have taken multiple soldiers. He didn't. He's controlling the situation, not ending it. He's hurting something, or someone. Doyle's voice dropped. The refugees, Carter. They're not coming from where the initial brief said they were coming from. I pulled the movement data. 3 of the last 4 groups came from the northwest, not the northeast. Someone changed their routing. Emily looked at the corridor. The northwestern approach, she had cataloged it as a secondary route, lower probability of use. It ran closer to the drainage gulch, closer to the eastern edge of the village, closer to the collapsed structure where she had found the disturbed snow. If you wanted to funnel people through a specific choke point, you would start by blocking the other routes, or by making the other routes feel dangerous. He shot Yates, Emily said slowly, not to kill a soldier, to close the primary corridor, force the refugees onto the northwest approach. Silence on the line. Then Doyle said very quietly, where does the northwest approach end up? Emily pulled her mental map, traced the route, past the collapsed structure, through the drainage gulch, out the other side of the village into the open ground beyond, where there was nothing. No extraction point, no aid station, no defensive position, just open ground and whatever was waiting on it. Jack, she said, I need that restricted manifest. Working on it. His voice was tight now. In the meantime, Carter, listen to me. Do not let those refugees move onto the northwest approach, whatever it costs. Do you understand? I understand. And watch your 6. If this shooter spent time observing your position before he acted, he knows exactly where you are. She was already moving. She relocated to the nave of the church. It was the tactically uncomfortable choice. Inside a structure rather than on its roof. Reduced sightlines, more exposure to anyone who entered at ground level. But it gave her something the rooftop did not. A direct sightline up through the bell tower access hatch. She needed to know if anyone was up there. She positioned herself in the shadow of a collapsed pew, prone, scope angled upward at a 45-degree angle. The hatch was closed. The ladder rungs above her were coated in undisturbed dust, gray and even. No shoe prints, no disturbed grime. Nobody had come up through the nave, which meant if someone was in the tower, they had entered from outside. From the exterior scaffolding on the tower's north face, old maintenance rigging, she had seen it when she first arrived, dismissed it as structural. But scaffolding was also a climbing route. She moved to the tower's exterior access, a narrow side door in the church's north wall, half buried by a drift that had built up against it. She checked the drift. At the base of the door, barely visible, the snow was compressed differently. A thin seam where something had pressed through, and then the drift had partially refilled. Recent, hours ago maybe, not days. She did not open the door. Instead, she went back to the nave and established a new position behind the altar. Solid stone, good cover, with sight lines covering both the main church entrance and the side door. Then she keyed her radio. "Jack, exterior access on the north tower face. Someone used it maybe 4 to 6 hours ago. The tower louver is open 2 inches on the east side. He was in the tower before you arrived." "Before I arrived," she confirmed. "He watched me set up. He knows my equipment, my habits, my field of observation." "Carter," Doyle's voice was measured, "if he's been running counter-observation on you for 4+ hours and hasn't taken a shot at you, it's because he doesn't want to. You're not his target." "Then what is his target?" "I don't know yet, but Yates wasn't random. Yates was a message." "To whom?" "Possibly to whoever is running the restricted operation." A pause. "Or possibly to us, to tell us this AO is already owned." She thought about the open louver, the knee prints, the drone jamming. "He's been here longer than us," she said. "Yes. And he let us deploy anyway." "Yes." "That's either arrogance," Emily said, "or he wants us here for a reason." Doyle didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice carried the careful tone she had come to associate with him working through a problem he didn't like the shape of. "There's a third option," he said. "What?" "He wants you here, specifically." The stone altar was cold against her shoulder. Outside, the wind had picked up. She could hear it working its way through the gaps in the church walls, a low and constant pressure. The daylight through the high windows was starting to thin. "Why?" she said. "Because you're the only thing in this village right now that can stop whatever he's setting up," Doyle said. "And he wants to know if you're good enough to figure it out before it happens." Emily stayed very still. "Or," Doyle added, "he wants to eliminate you before you can." "Those aren't mutually exclusive." "No," he said, "they are not." The second wave came from the wrong direction. Emily was still in the nave when her radio clicked 4 times in rapid succession. The aid station's emergency signal. She moved to the side window, staying below the sill, and angled her scope outward through the 2-inch gap where the wood had warped away from the frame. They were coming from the northwest, 6 of them, then 8, then more. A loose group of 15, maybe 18 people, moving fast and without any military escort. Children stumbling in the snow. A man carrying an elderly woman on his back. 2 teenage boys in thin jackets who had long since gone past cold and into the gray, moving but not knowing it territory that precedes serious hypothermia. They were coming from the drainage gulch. Emily keyed her radio. "Aid station, hold position. Do not open the door. Say again, do not open the door until I clear the approach." A voice she didn't recognize, the medic, a young sergeant named Holt, came back tight with stress. "Carter, I've got 18 civilians in the open. Temperature is dropping. 2 of them are going to be in trouble in the next—" "I know. Hold position." She moved her scope along the northwest approach. The drainage gulch ran from right to left across her field of view. The civilians were clear of it now. They had crossed the open ground and were 40 meters from the aid station. No shooter in the gulch that she could see. But the gulch was deep, 25 feet of cut bank in shadow. She couldn't clear the bottom of it from this angle, and the refugees kept coming. More emerging from the tree line, these ones from the northeast, the original approach, which should have been the safe route. But they were moving wrong, scattered, not grouped, running independently instead of in coordinated elements. Several of them were looking back over their shoulders. Something had broken behind them. "Jack," she said, "multiple groups in the open simultaneously. Northwest and northeast approaches both active. Someone pushed them out at the same time." "Deliberate," Doyle said immediately. "Force a mass movement. Overwhelm the aid station's capacity to manage individual groups. Create confusion." "Yes." "Carter, in the confusion, what can't you watch?" She was already thinking it. The south side of the village, the church's blind spot, the western structure cluster. "If I'm managing the approaches," she said, "I'm not watching the rest of the village. And if the restricted operation has equipment or personnel staged somewhere you're not watching, they move it while I'm occupied. That's my read." The first group of refugees reached the aid station. Sergeant Holt opened the door and began pulling people in. The noise level in the village rose. Voices, children crying, the creak of the door opening and closing. After 4 hours of near-total silence, it was disorienting. Emily forced herself to ignore it. She swept south. The western structure cluster, the narrow lane behind the collapsed building. Movement. She stopped her scope. In the lane behind the collapsed structure, barely visible through the gap between two standing walls, something had moved. Not a person, a vehicle, or large equipment. She caught only the dark edge of it before it passed behind the wall and out of her sightline. She had seen that shape for less than 2 seconds, but she had seen it. "Jack," she said, "something's moving on the south side, behind the western cluster. Large. Wheeled." A pause. Wheeled in this terrain means serious operational investment. That's not a pickup truck. "No," she agreed. "It's not." Sergeant Holt's voice came over the radio at 15:19 hours. "Carter, I've got a problem." His voice had gone very flat. The kind of flat that people adopt when they're trying to stay professional while something is going wrong. One of the refugees, an older man, came in with the last group. He's asking for the officer in charge. Won't talk to anyone else. And he has something I think you need to see. I can't come to you right now. I know, but... A hesitation. He gave me a piece of paper, handwritten. I'm going to read it to you. Go. The sound of paper unfolding. It says 2 positions. 1 fires, 1 watches. The one that watches is the one you cannot find. Ask your sniper, which of us is more dangerous? Emily said nothing for a moment. The church walls creaked in the wind. Ask him where he got it, she said. Static, muffled voices. Then Holt. He says a man gave it to him at the edge of the northwest tree line. 20 minutes ago. He says the man spoke English. He described him as, and I'm quoting, tall, wearing white, moving like he knew you were listening. 2 positions, 1 fires, 1 watches. She had been working the problem as a single shooter operation. 1 sniper, mobile, using the terrain and the refugees to create confusion. The knee prints at the North Gap, the tower, the shot on Yates. She had been connecting those dots into a single actor. But what if they weren't connected that way? What if the shot on Yates had come from one position and the observation, the tower, the knee prints, the message, had come from another? 2 positions, 1 fires, 1 watches. Jack, she said, I heard. If there are 2 of them, the one that fires is the decoy, Doyle said quietly. He draws your attention northeast, while the other one operates freely. Emily ran it back through everything she had observed. The shot on Yates from the northeast quadrant, the observation evidence in the tower and at the North Gap, the movement behind the western cluster, the refugees pushed simultaneously from 2 approach angles. Two people could coordinate that. One person could not. The message, she said. He sent it because he wants me to know. Why would he want you to know? She thought about it for 3 seconds. Because, she said slowly, if I spend the next 2 hours looking for a second shooter, I won't be watching the Western Cluster. Another long silence. He's not trying to beat you, Doyle said. He's trying to occupy you. While whatever is in that Western Cluster finishes what it came here to do. The light through the church windows was failing now. The gray was deepening toward the flat, featureless dark of an Alaskan winter evening. In 40 minutes, thermal would be her only reliable option, and thermal had its own limitations in cold terrain. Heat signatures blurred by snow, false positives from engines and equipment. Jack, Emily said, I need that manifest. I know. Before dark. I'm trying, Carter, I'm trying. His voice carried something she rarely heard from him, frustration. Not at her, at the architecture of the situation, at information that should be available and wasn't. Someone has locked that file tight. I've gone up 3 levels and hit a wall each time. Who has the authority to wall that off from a deployed sniper's tactical coordinator? Silence. Jack. I'm going to make one more call, he said. A personal call. Someone who owes me a conversation. A pause. Hold the village, Carter. Hold the refugees on this side. Don't let anything move through that Western Cluster until I get back to you. Copy. And Carter, his voice dropped to something close and quiet. Watch the tower. Even if you think it's empty, watch it. She was already watching it. The east-facing louver was still open exactly 2 inches. And now in the last gray light of the failing afternoon, she could see something she had not been able to see before. A faint, intermittent reflection from somewhere deep in the tower's shadow. Not glass, not ice, an optical lens. Someone was still up there, and they were watching her right back. The storm came without warning. That was the Alaskan interior's particular cruelty, not the cold itself, which was predictable and consistent and could be managed with the right gear and the right mindset, but the speed with which conditions shifted. One moment the air was clear and brittle, visibility stretching to 400 meters across the white expanse of the village. The next, the sky simply closed. It came from the northwest, a wall of gray-white that swallowed the ridgeline first, then the tree line, then the space between the tree line and the village in what felt like 30 seconds. The temperature dropped 4 degrees in the span of a single breath. The wind went from 9 miles per hour to something north of 25, and the sound it made moving through the gaps in the church walls shifted from a low moan to something more aggressive. A constant, battering pressure that made communication difficult and thought harder. Emily pressed herself tighter against the stone altar. Visibility, 50 meters, then 30, then less. Through her scope, the western cluster of structures had become a smear of gray shapes. The drainage gulch had disappeared entirely. The tower above her, she could still see its base, the lower scaffold, the dark wood of the exterior wall, but the upper section was lost in the swirling white. The optical lens she had spotted in the louver was gone, not because the watcher had left, because the storm had taken the light. She keyed her radio. Jack, storm's in. I've lost visual on everything past 30 meters. Static. Then his voice, broken and thin. Copy. Satellite feed's gone too. I'm working off last pass from... More static. Manifest, Carter. I've got... Say again, you're breaking up. Got a name. Company called Meridian Resource Group. Static swallowed the rest. Jack, Meridian Resource Group. Say again. Nothing. Just static and wind. She lowered the radio. The storm had isolated her completely. In a whiteout, a sniper rifle became almost irrelevant. You couldn't engage what you couldn't see. You couldn't track movement you couldn't observe. The entire calculus of her profession, patience, observation, Precise calculation of distance and wind and drop, reduced to zero in conditions like this, which meant whoever was in the tower was equally blind. Almost equally blind. She thought about what she knew. The watcher in the tower had been observing her position for hours, possibly since before she arrived. He knew the church layout. He knew the nave, the altar, the side door. If he came down from the tower in the storm, using the cover of reduced visibility the same way she would, he would not be navigating blind. He would be navigating from memory. He would know exactly where she was. She moved, not fast. Fast movement in a tactical environment created noise and disturbed settled dust and left heat traces. She moved the way she had been trained to move in confined spaces. Low, slow, deliberate, each foot placement tested before weight was committed. She went from the altar to the far wall, then along the wall toward the main entrance, staying in the deepest shadow the failing light allowed. She found a position behind a collapsed section of the interior gallery, a wooden balcony that had come down at one end, creating a low, triangular space between the fallen timbers and the stone wall. She could see both the main entrance and the side door from here. She could see the base of the tower ladder. She settled in and slowed her breathing. The storm hammered the church around her. She waited. She heard him before she saw him. Not footsteps. The wind was too loud for that. But a change in the air pressure near the side door. A brief shift in the draft that moved through the church's gaps and cracks. The kind of change that happens when a door opens and closes quickly, efficiently, with the minimum necessary movement. He was inside. Emily did not move, did not adjust her scope, did not change her breathing. Patience wins. The shadow came along the west wall, moving the same way she had moved, low, slow, deliberate. He was good. He was very good. In the near total darkness of the nave, she could barely distinguish him from the wall behind him. White outer layer, hood up, moving with the particular economy of someone who had done this many times before. He stopped at the altar. He was looking at where she had been. She watched him crouch, examine the stone floor. He was reading her position, the compressed dust, the slight warmth her body had left in the cold air. He would know she had been there recently. He would know she had moved. He straightened, turned slowly. She was 30 feet away in the shadow of the fallen gallery. Between them, open floor, broken pews, the skeletal remains of a wooden icon screen. He was scanning, methodical, working left to right. She had perhaps 4 seconds before his scan reached her position. She did not fire. She could have fired. She had a clear enough angle, not clean, not the kind of shot she preferred, but workable. 60% probability of a first-round hit in these conditions, in this light. She didn't take it, because she needed to know which one he was, the shooter or the watcher. And she needed to know what was in the western cluster. A dead man tells you nothing. She shifted her weight, deliberately just enough to disturb the dust at the base of the fallen timber. A sound, small but deliberate. He spun toward it instantly. In that moment of spin, his right arm came up, reflex, weapon tracking, and she saw his rifle. Not a bolt action, a semi-automatic platform, suppressed, with a thermal optic mounted on top. He had thermal. He can see me. The shot came before she finished the thought. It hit the timber 3 inches from her left shoulder, sending a spray of old wood and frozen debris across her face. She was already rolling, left, away from the shot vector, behind the thicker section of fallen gallery. A second round punched through the timber where her torso had been a half-second earlier. She came up on the far side of the collapsed section, moving fast now, abandoning the slow is smooth discipline because slow was going to get her killed. She crossed to the north wall in 4 running steps, went through the narrow passage beside the font, and came out into the side vestibule, the side door. She hit it with her shoulder and came out into the storm. The wind took her immediately, a physical force, not just weather. She leaned into it and moved north, hugging the church exterior, feeling her way by touch along the stone wall. Snow and ice crystals drove into every gap in her gear. Temperature against exposed skin was immediate and punishing. Behind her, the side door did not open. He had not followed. She stopped at the church's northeast corner and pressed her back against the stone, breathing hard, forcing the rate down. Her left shoulder ached where the timber debris had hit. Her face was stinging from the fragments. She checked her rifle. Functional, no damage to the scope. Think. He had thermal and he had let her run. That was either confidence or calculation. Confident meant he believed the storm and the cold would finish what he had started. Calculated meant he had a reason to keep her outside and mobile, away from the western cluster, away from the aid station, away from whatever was happening on the south side of the village. Both options assumed she was no longer a tactical problem he needed to solve immediately. She would use that assumption. She did not go back into the church. The church was compromised. He knew its layout as well as she did. Probably better if he had been using the tower as a long-term observation post. Going back in meant fighting on ground he had already mapped. She needed new ground. The structure to the church's immediate north was a residential building, 2 stories, exterior staircase on the west face, windows on all 4 sides. She had cataloged it during her initial overwatch as a secondary position, lower priority because it lacked the church's elevation. Now that elevation was irrelevant. What she needed was cover, concealment, and angles she could control. She moved through the storm, staying close to structures where possible, using walls as windbreaks and navigation guides. The snow was deep here, mid-thigh in the drifts, hard-packed where the wind had compressed it against the building bases. Every step required deliberate effort. After 2 minutes of movement, she was already feeling the cold working its way into her legs. Keep moving. Cold kills the still. The residential building's ground floor door was frozen shut. She forced it with her shoulder, the ice seal breaking with a crack that the wind immediately buried. Inside, darkness, cold, the smell of old wood and abandonment. A staircase along the right wall. Through the front windows, she could see the church, a dark mass in the white storm, maybe 25 meters away. She went upstairs. The second floor had 2 rooms. She chose the back one, east-facing window, angled toward the church's north wall and the base of the tower scaffold. She cleared the room in 30 seconds. Nothing. Bare floorboards, a rusted iron bed frame, a window with 2 cracked panes that let the cold in as a steady, cutting draft. She sat up in the corner beside the window, not in front of it, never silhouette yourself in a window, but at an angle that let her glass the church exterior through the cracked pane without exposing herself to anyone watching from outside. The tower scaffold was visible, barely through the storm, but visible. She watched it and regulated her breathing and let her body temperature stabilize. Her radio crackled, static. Then, faint but present, "Carter, Carter, come in." "I'm here," she said quietly. "Lost you for..." Static. "Are you?" "I'm mobile, new position. Church is compromised." The watcher came down. "Copy, listen." His voice broke in and out. The storm was killing the signal. "Meridian Resource Group. Private. Resource extraction. Active." Static. "Not authorized." More static. "Carter, the refugees are..." "Jack, I can't read you. Say your most important element." A long crackle, then surprisingly clear for just a moment. His voice came through with a particular, focused calm of a man delivering a message he needs to be understood. "The refugees are not the mission. They are the cover." Then static again. She held the radio for a moment. "The refugees are not the mission. They are the cover." Cover for what? For Meridian Resource Group's equipment moving through the village under the confusion of a humanitarian evacuation? For someone extracting something from this location that predated the refugees, predated the military presence, predated everything? She looked at the floor, at the old boards in the cold and the dark. This village had been dead for 40 years, but someone had come back to it, and they had done it under cover of a crisis that had conveniently required a military response, that had conveniently required an overwatch sniper whose presence conveniently required a counter-sniper to manage. She turned the logic over carefully, the way she would work a ballistics problem, starting from the known and building toward the unknown. The refugees were real. The crisis that had displaced them was real. Whatever violence had pushed families into the Alaskan backcountry in winter, that violence was not manufactured. You could not fake hypothermia. You could not fake the expression on the face of a woman using a dead soldier's body as cover for her children. But the response to that crisis, the specific routing, the specific village, the specific military request that had put Emily Carter in this location on this day, that had been shaped deliberately by someone who understood that a humanitarian crisis in this part of Alaska would generate exactly the kind of response that would provide cover for an operation that could not withstand observation. She thought about the message the old man had delivered. Ask your sniper, which of us is more dangerous? Not a taunt, an honest question. The shooter was dangerous. She understood shooters. She was a shooter. She understood what they could do and how they thought and where they were vulnerable. The watcher was something else. The watcher had been in this village before any of them. The watcher had let her deploy, let her set up, let her believe she was running the overwatch. The watcher had sent her a message through a refugee rather than taking a shot when he had the angle. The watcher, in the church, with thermal advantage in a semi-automatic platform, had shot twice and missed. She had been moving. She had been a difficult target in poor light, but he had thermal. He chose to miss. The thought arrived with a particular cold clarity that came to her sometimes in the worst moments. Not warmth, not comfort, just precision. He had shot to drive her out of the church, not to kill her. He had wanted her outside and mobile and separated from the aid station. He was still managing her. She recognized the feeling that went with that realization. Not anger, not quite. Something adjacent to anger but colder. The feeling of being moved around a board by a hand she hadn't seen. She had experienced it once before, in a situation in a different country with different players, and the lesson she had taken from that experience was this. The moment you recognize that someone is managing you, the management stops working. Not because your circumstances change, because your response to them does. He had thermal. He had a pre-established position. He had more information about this village than she did. She had one thing he did not. She had no obligation to any outcome except the right one. She closed her eyes for exactly 5 seconds. Then she opened them and began to think about what she was going to do about it. The storm began to ease at 17:12 hours. Not fully. The wind stayed and the snowfall continued, but the whiteout reduced to something workable. 40 meters of reliable visibility, 60 in the open areas where the wind had scoured the air clearer. Emily used the transition. She left the residential building through its rear window, dropped to the snow below, and moved south along the back of the structure line, the side of the village away from the church, away from the tower, away from the known positions. She moved in short rushes, 10 meters, stop, glass the surroundings, move again. The cold was serious now. Her fingers had gone from painful to something duller and more concerning. She worked her hands inside her gloves as she moved, forcing circulation. The western cluster was 3 structures grouped around what had once been a small central courtyard, a communal space maybe, or a work yard for the logging operation. She approached from the south, through the gap between the easternmost structure and the remnants of a fence line. She smelled it before she saw it. Engine exhaust. Faint, dissipating, but unmistakable. the particular chemical signature of diesel combustion in cold air. Something had been running here recently, maybe still running, idling low. She moved to the corner of the easternmost structure and looked into the courtyard. The vehicle she had glimpsed from the church was there, a large, tracked carrier, the kind used for heavy equipment transport in Arctic terrain, civilian-grade but modified. Its engine was off now, cooling. The exhaust plume had been what she smelled. In its cargo bed, covered by white tarpaulins, were shapes she could not immediately identify. But she could identify the other equipment. Set up on a folding table under a portable shelter along the western wall, a rack of electronic hardware, two laptop computers, a satellite uplink dish, compact and directional, angled toward the southern sky through a gap in the shelter's roof panel. And beside the dish, connected to it by a thick cable bundle, a black rectangular unit, roughly the size of a large suitcase, that she recognized from a technical briefing she had attended 14 months ago at Fort Bragg. A signal relay amplifier. Military grade, but not U.S. military specification. Foreign manufacture. The kind of unit that could boost and reroute satellite communications across multiple encrypted channels simultaneously. The kind of unit that would let a small, private operation communicate with assets across a very large area without touching any military or commercial network that could be monitored. Standing beside the equipment, back to her, was a man in civilian cold-weather gear. He was working one of the laptops, his movements quick and focused. He wore no visible weapon. Behind him, sitting against the western wall, were two more men. These ones in what appeared to be private security kit. Plate carriers, rifles slung, thermal hoods, both were watching the approaches, not toward Emily, toward the north, toward the church, toward the aid station, toward the refugee corridor. They were watching for the military response. They were not watching their own back. Emily did not move. She counted. 3 personnel visible, possibly more inside the covered structures. 1 vehicle. Relay equipment that represented a significant financial investment. This was not improvised, not opportunistic. This had been planned and resourced and pre-positioned. The tarpaulin-covered shapes in the cargo bed. She needed to know what was under those tarps. She worked her way around to the north side of the carrier, staying low, using the vehicle's bulk as cover from the 2 security personnel. The tarp on the nearest section was secured with bungee clips, civilian fasteners, quick release. She unclipped 2 of them and lifted the edge. Coring equipment, drilling cores, sample tubes, geological survey hardware. Expensive, specialized, the kind of equipment used for subsurface resource assessment. This was a survey operation. Meridian Resource Group had been running geological surveys under cover of the humanitarian crisis, using the refugee movement and the military response as a smokescreen to operate in terrain they had no legal authorization to be in. She resecured the tarp, and as she straightened, she saw the third thing she had not noticed from her initial angle. Along the south wall of the courtyard, half buried under fresh snow that had drifted against it during the storm, was a second vehicle, smaller than the carrier, a utility truck, white-painted, no markings. Its rear cargo door was open. Inside, communications equipment of a different kind. A mobile command transmitter, large format antenna, ground spike mounted, the dish oriented east. Control panel lit with status indicators, green, amber, 1 red. Operational, active. A mobile command transmitter of that specification, in this location, with that dish orientation, could do one thing above all others. It could coordinate the movements of assets across the entire eastern AO. Drone routing, ground element positioning, refugee corridor manipulation. She understood it all in a single moment of cold, absolute clarity. The transmitter was not supporting the survey operation. The transmitter was the operation. The survey equipment was secondary, contingent on the transmitter's ability to control the operational environment long enough for the survey to complete. Everything else, the refugee movement, the shooter on the northeast corridor, the watcher in the tower, the carefully managed confusion, all of it was designed to keep military attention focused north, while this transmitter ran the show from the south. She took a photograph with the small camera unit on her wrist mount, then another. Then she moved back the way she had come, slow and careful, until she was clear of the courtyard. Her radio was still static heavy, but she keyed it anyway. Jack, Western Cluster, Meridian has a mobile command transmitter active in the south courtyard. Relay amplifier, satellite uplink, geological survey equipment. 3 personnel visible plus security. This is a coordinated resource extraction operation. The refugees are environmental cover. Static. Jack? A fragment of his voice. Copy. Transmitter. Static. Carter, do not. Lost. She waited. Nothing. She was alone with the information. The radio came back at 1741 hours. Partial signal, unstable, but enough. Carter. Doyle's voice was tight in a way she had not heard from him before. Not the controlled tightness of tactical focus. Something harder. Something that, in another man, she might have called fear. I made that personal call. I got an answer. Tell me. Meridian Resource Group has a DoD advisory contract, legitimate on paper. It covers survey operations in designated areas of the Alaskan interior. A pause. This village is not in the designated area. They are operating outside their authorization by approximately 60 kilometers. I know, I'm looking at their equipment. Carter, listen to me. The DoD contract, it has a non-interference clause. Any military personnel who disrupt an authorized Meridian operation are subject to. They're not authorized here. I know that, you know that, but the contract language is broad enough that Meridian's legal team has been arguing, in certain conversations at certain levels, that the non-interference clause applies to all their operations regardless of specific location. His voice dropped. Someone at a significant level agreed with that interpretation. In writing. The cold pressed into her from all sides. Someone told them they could operate anywhere, she said. Someone told them the military wouldn't stop them, Doyle said, which is not quite the same thing, but the practical effect is identical. A pause. Carter, I've been told, not by my chain of command, by the personal contact I called, that there is significant pressure from above to allow this operation to complete without interference. People are going to die, Jack. The refugees are being funneled through a corridor designed to keep them away from this courtyard. When Meridian finishes, those corridors close. Those people are in the open in these temperatures with no extraction. I know. How many? A long pause. Current count through the aid station is 61. There are estimated to be another 40 to 60 still in the approach corridors. Over 100 people. Jack. I know, Carter. Tell me what you're telling me. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the careful quality of a man choosing each word with the precision he would apply to a shot. I am telling you, he said, that I cannot authorize any action that interferes with Meridian's operation. I am also telling you that I am going to be unavailable by radio for the next 15 minutes while I make another call. A beat. And I am telling you that in my 30 years in this work, the only thing I have never regretted is finishing what I started. She understood him completely. 15 minutes, she said. 15 minutes, he confirmed. Carter, his voice shifted, just slightly, just enough. Be careful. The radio went quiet. She stayed in position for 30 seconds without moving, not from hesitation, from the discipline of a person who had learned that the moment immediately after a significant decision is the moment most likely to produce a mistake. She let the quiet fill in around her. Let the wind work. Let her heart rate do whatever it needed to do, and then come back down. Jack Doyle had been running counter-sniper operations since before she was old enough to hold a rifle. He had worked in places and under conditions that had broken other men. Not physically, not obviously, but in the way that accumulated costs eventually exceed a budget that nobody ever audited. She had known men like that. Men who had done the right thing too many times in situations where the right thing was not the sanctioned thing, and who had paid for it in career and reputation, and the particular loneliness of people who understand something that their institutions have decided not to understand. Doyle had not broken that way. She had always wondered why. She thought she understood it a little better now. The only thing I have never regretted is finishing what I started. Not the things he had done, not the decisions, the completion of them, the following through, the refusal to leave something half done because the risk became clear at the moment it needed to be taken. She thought about her own record in that category, about the mission that had given her the habit of cataloging civilian movement, about the choice she had made that day that she had been making the right way every day since. Not to not act, but to act completely, to commit fully to the thing once the thing became clear. The thing was clear now. She looked at the dark shape of the courtyard structures 20 meters behind her, at the storm sky above, still heavy and close, at the snow which was falling again, lighter now but steady, laying down a fresh white layer over everything that had already happened here. 120 people. She checked her ammunition, counted her remaining rounds, assessed her position, her angles, the distance from here to the transmitter, and from the transmitter to the security personnel, and from the security personnel to wherever the watcher currently was. Then she began to plan. She found the kill funnel at 18:03 hours. She had gone back to elevation, not the church tower, not the residential building, but the roof of the northernmost structure in the western cluster. A low outbuilding with a flat section of roof that gave her a sight line back across the courtyard, and more importantly, a sight line northeast toward the drainage gulch. The gulch was the key. She had known since Doyle's observation that the refugees were being directed away from safe routes and toward the northwest approach, which ran through the drainage gulch. She had understood that the gulch fed into the open ground beyond the village's eastern edge. What she had not been able to see, until now, with this angle and the storm reduced enough to extend her visibility to nearly 80 meters, was what was waiting on the open ground beyond. A second tracked vehicle, larger than the one in the courtyard, positioned at the gulch's eastern exit. Not a survey vehicle. The markings on its side were obscured by snow and distance, but the shape was recognizable. She had seen that profile in equipment briefings. A security contractor's armored transport, the kind used for personnel detention and transfer. Meridian was not just surveying, they were preparing to collect people. The refugees being funneled through the gulch would emerge on the eastern side directly in front of that vehicle. Once they were past the gulch's exit, the narrow cut bank section where the terrain constricted movement to single file, they would be in an open area with no cover and no direction to run except toward the vehicle or back into the gulch. It was not a kill zone in the traditional military sense. Nobody was going to open fire on civilians in the open, but it was a processing zone, a collection point, and people collected by a private security contractor operating illegally in a non-authorized area with a restricted DoD contract and a signal relay system that bypassed all standard military monitoring. Those people would disappear into a system that nobody at Emily's level could access or trace. She forced herself to stay still and think rather than react. Reaction was the luxury of people who had already done their thinking. She had not done enough thinking yet. Who were they collecting? Not the refugees at random. That would be logistically incoherent. A private contractor did not deploy an armored transport and a mobile command transmitter to collect random displaced persons. There was a list, There had to be a list. Someone in those refugee groups was carrying information, or held a specific identity, or represented a liability to whatever Meridian's parent interests were. The others were collateral, not targets but acceptable detention, which meant the collection would not look like violence. It would look like processing, documentation, the bureaucratic absorption of people who had no paperwork, no representation, no one watching for them except an overextended humanitarian response, with 63 people already packed into a building that used to be a general store. She thought about the boy with the bandaged hand, the one who kept looking back at the tree line. He knows, she thought. He knows exactly what's following him. Whatever was behind these refugees, whatever had pushed them into the Alaskan backcountry in winter, it had not stopped at the border. It had sent assets ahead. It had built the cage before the people arrived. She thought about the old man who had carried the message, about the woman who had sheltered behind Yates's body, about the 19 days the contractor had spent in this village, watching the cage being assembled, waiting for a key. Whatever they were running from had followed them here, and it had arrived first. She keyed her radio. Doyle was still unavailable. She got static. She clicked for the aid station instead. Holt. Carter. His voice was exhausted. I've got 73 people in here, and the walls are starting to feel smaller. How many still in the approaches? Last estimate was 40 plus. They stopped coming in about 20 minutes ago. Northwest approach has gone quiet. They're in the gulch already, or close to it. Holt, I need you to send 2 soldiers, non-uniformed if possible, civilian cold weather gear, into the Northwest approach. Their mission is to redirect any refugees they find, turn them around or route them directly south, away from the gulch. Do not let anyone enter the gulch from the village side. Carter, I've got 2 functional soldiers and 73 civilians. I know. Send them anyway. She paused. Holt, if those people go through the gulch, they don't come back. I need 2 minutes to explain later. Right now I need 2 soldiers moving. A pause, then, moving. Thank you. She looked at the transmitter truck. 80 meters. Clear enough shot in current visibility. Maybe 65 on the transmitter's antenna assembly, which was the critical component. Destroy the antenna and the transmitter's coordination function collapsed. Without coordination, the armored vehicle at the gulch exit had no command signal. Without command signal, its operators, following protocol, would hold position and wait for instructions rather than act. It bought time, not a solution. Time. The shot angle from this rooftop was workable. Wind from the northwest, current velocity approximately 14 miles per hour, gusting. She would need a correction of 8 to 10 inches left at that distance. The antenna assembly was roughly 18 inches in diameter, achievable even in these conditions. But taking that shot meant revealing her position, and somewhere in this village the watcher was still active. She thought about what Doyle had said. He wants to know if you're good enough to figure it out before it happens. She had figured it out. Now she had to decide what to do about it. At 18:22 hours, the watcher found her. She saw it in the snow, 60 meters to her northeast, at the corner of the residential building she had used earlier, a small displacement. A drift disturbed by a passing body, the snow settling into new angles that didn't match the wind pattern. He had come around from the east side of the village. He had been tracking her movement through her footprints. Of course he had. She had been moving. She did not move now. She kept her position on the outbuilding roof, absolutely still, and watched the corner of the residential building through her scope. He would have to cross open ground to reach the western cluster from that direction. Approximately 35 meters of exposed space between the residential building's corner and the nearest structure in the western cluster. He would know she had elevation on him. He would not cross directly. She waited. Nothing moved for 4 minutes. The wind worked steadily at the snow around her, drawing small, swirling patterns that would slowly erode her cover. The ghillie suit that had been effective on the church roof was slightly wrong for this rooftop surface, not quite matching the texture of the wind-scoured wooden shingles beneath the snow layer. In another 20 minutes, if he had good enough glass, he might be able to distinguish her outline. She had 20 minutes. Or he would move first, and she would have him. Patience wins. She watched the corner. At the 6-minute mark, a piece of wood appeared at the corner's base. A stick, maybe 60 centimeters long, pushed out slowly from behind the wall with a scrap of white fabric tied to its end. Not a flag of surrender, but a probe. He was checking her reaction, testing whether she would fire at movement. She did not fire. The stick withdrew. At the 9-minute mark, a small rock appeared, tossed from behind the corner, landing in the open ground between the residential building and the western cluster. It raised a small puff of snow when it hit. Again, she did not react. He was mapping her patience. She understood the technique because she used it herself. You push small stimuli into a target's field of observation and record the response latency. No response to physical movement meant either the target hadn't detected you or the target was disciplined enough to hold for a better shot. The distinction mattered because it changed your approach vector. He was trying to determine which kind of problem she was. She was going to show him. On the 11th minute, she did something she had never done in a duel before. She spoke, not into the radio, into the open air, at a volume calibrated to carry 35 meters against the wind without carrying further. The kind of volume a trained shooter learned for range commands, and that became instinctive. "I know about the transmitter," she said, "and I know about the gulch." Silence. Wind. "The survey is done," she continued. "Whatever Meridian came here to find, they've found it. The transmitter is the only thing keeping the collection operation running. You know that, and I know that." She paused. "You've been managing this situation since before I arrived. You sent me the message. You drove me out of the church instead of killing me. You've been trying to tell me something." The corner was still. "So tell me." 40 seconds passed. Then a voice came back, low, accented, not strongly, but distinctly. Eastern European, she thought. Professional. The voice of someone who had been in a great many cold places and done a great many difficult things. "The transmitter controls 40 people," the voice said, "in the gulch and approaching it. If it goes dark before the collection vehicle receives the stand-down code, those people are detained indefinitely. That is Meridian protocol." She processed this. "You need the stand-down code transmitted before I destroy the transmitter." "Yes. And you have the code." A pause. "I have access to the code. The operator inside the courtyard has it loaded. He will transmit it if the operation is terminated by his own authority. If the transmitter is destroyed before he transmits, the protocol activates automatically." Why would he terminate voluntarily? Because Meridian's legal protection depends on their contract remaining intact. Another pause. "The contract has a civilian harm clause. If I provide documentation of civilian endangerment to the correct channel, the contract is suspended. The operator is legally required to stand down." His voice was very even. "I have been building that documentation since I arrived. I have 19 days of operational records. I needed one more element." "What element?" "An official U.S. military witness." She held very still on the rooftop. "That's why you let us deploy," she said. "I requested the military response through a humanitarian channel 3 weeks ago," he said. "I did not expect them to send a sniper, but a sniper is better. A sniper sees everything. You manipulated the entire situation to get a witness. I managed a situation that was already dangerous to produce the best possible outcome." A pause. "The shooter on the northeast corridor is my colleague. He was securing the refugee routes, closing the ones Meridian had trapped, and opening the ones that led here. Yates was not supposed to die. The shot was intended to stop him from escorting refugees onto a Meridian-controlled route. The wind shifted at the moment of, he stopped. It was a mistake. It is the only mistake. Emily thought about Yates, about his body in the snow, about the woman who had sheltered her children behind it. That doesn't make it acceptable, she said. No, the voice said. It does not. A long moment. What do you need from me? She said. Neither of them moved for the next 40 minutes. This was not inaction. This was the most active thing either of them had been doing since the operation began. The Watcher, she had begun to think of him as the contractor, capital C, because whatever else he was operating with the focused professionalism of a man who had been in this specific type of ambiguous, high-stakes, no-good option situation before, was transmitting his documentation through a channel she couldn't access and couldn't verify. He had gone back to the corner of the residential building after their conversation and become still, and she had returned to absolute stillness on her rooftop. And between them, the storm continued its slow recession, and the village continued its cold silence. And somewhere to the northeast, in the drainage gulch, 40 people were moving through darkness toward a vehicle that was waiting for a signal that had not yet come. She listened to the storm, listened past it, in the way she had learned, not for specific sounds, but for the shape of silence. The absence of expected sound was information. Wind through wooden gaps, the irregular creak of structures contracting in the cold, the distant murmur of the aid station's generator. These were the village's baseline noise profile. Anything added to that profile or subtracted from it was signal. The cold was working on her seriously now. 4 hours of exposure, the forced run through the storm, the damp that had gotten into her left boot during the rooftop descent. She could feel her core temperature holding, but only just. Her fingers, inside the gloves, had gone through pain and back to a dull, background numbness that required monitoring. Every 10 minutes she ran a manual check. Flex all fingers, confirm full grip strength, verify she could actuate the trigger with precision. She was passing those checks for now. She would not pass them indefinitely. The cold did not care about operational importance. It worked with the same indifference on soldiers and contractors and refugees and the bodies of men who had made mistakes in the wind. It was the most honest force on the battlefield. She thought about the 40 people in the gulch. She could not see them. She did not know their names or their histories, or what specific violence had put them on this road, in this weather, in this village. She knew only the aggregate fact of them, 40 human beings moving through a frozen cut in the earth toward a vehicle that was waiting to take them somewhere they had not chosen to go. In her previous deployment, the one she didn't discuss, the one that had given her the habit of cataloging civilian movement the way other people catalog breathing, she had failed to act in time once. Once had been enough to understand what once meant. The geometry of that failure had been different. The category was the same. She was not going to add another entry to that category. The only thing I have never regretted is finishing what I started. She thought about Doyle saying that, about the 30 years behind the statement, about the specific weight that a man carries after 30 years of making these calculations in the field, the weight that produces either bitterness or something cleaner, something that looks like acceptance but isn't quite the same thing. Doyle had the cleaner version. She had always known that about him without being able to articulate it until now. She wanted to have the cleaner version, too. At 1847 hours, the generator murmur cut out for 4 seconds, then resumed. Load spike on the power supply. Something drawing current in the aid station. At 1851, a series of small cracks from the direction of the courtyard. Thermal contraction of the carrier vehicle's metal as its engine cooled completely. At 1858, nothing. The storm had died enough that she could hear, very faintly, the sound of the drainage gulch, water running beneath the ice somewhere deep in its cut banks. The sound of that water was a clock. Every minute it ran, 40 people were closer to the gulch exit. She did not know how far they had come or how much distance remained. She did not know if Holt's two soldiers had reached the approach in time to redirect anyone. She knew only that the window was not open indefinitely. She looked at the transmitter truck. She looked at the contractor's corner. She made a decision about how much longer she would wait. And then, at 1903, a sound that did not belong to any of those categories. 3 short tones from her radio. Not a voice, a data signal, the kind used for digital message transmission. She looked at the radio's small display screen. A text string, 6 characters, a code. She looked at the Western cluster. "You transmitted through my radio," she said, keeping her voice at the same measured volume as before. "You are the witness," the contractor said from behind his corner. "The code is yours to use, if you choose to use it. If I bring this to the courtyard operator, he has to honor it? The contract requires it. The stand-down protocol is automatic once the code is entered into the command terminal. The collection vehicle receives the abort signal. The 40 people in the gulch are released." A pause. "And Meridian's contract is suspended pending investigation." Pending investigation that someone already tried to kill with a restricted manifest and a non-interference clause. Yes, which is why the documentation I transmitted went to 4 separate recipients, not 1. His voice was very steady. "The investigation will happen. The question is whether it happens before or after the people in the gulch become permanently unaccountable." She looked at the code on her radio display. She looked at the courtyard 20 meters away, at the operator sitting at his laptop, working, unaware that 2 snipers were 35 meters apart, having a conversation that was about to change what he did next. At the security personnel watching the northern approaches. At the transmitter truck with its lit status panel and its active antenna. She thought about Jack Doyle, who was on a personal call he had made so that he could be officially unavailable while his sniper made a decision he could not sanction, but could not stop. She thought about what he had said. "The only thing I have never regretted is finishing what I started." She thought about Yates, about the woman and the children, about a boy with a bandaged hand who had kept looking back at the tree line as if he knew what was following him. She made her decision. She came off the rooftop at 1911 hours, down the outbuilding's exterior, using the window ledge and the frozen drain pipe, controlled descent, quiet, 12 seconds from rooftop to ground. She landed in snow up to her knees, absorbed the impact, came up moving. She crossed to the courtyard entrance in 6 seconds. The 2 security personnel heard her before they saw her. The crunch of snow, then her appearance at the courtyard entrance, rifle up, already calling in a voice that left no room for interpretation. "U.S. Army, stand down, weapons on the ground." They hesitated. 1 second. 2. She was not pointing the rifle at them. She was pointing it at the transmitter's antenna assembly. "Stand down or I destroy the transmitter," she said. "When the transmitter goes dark without the abort code, your collection vehicle activates. 40 civilians are detained. Every one of them becomes evidence of unauthorized operation in a non-designated area." She kept her voice absolutely level. "Your operator knows what that means. Ask him." The operator at the laptop had turned. He was looking at her. Young, she was surprised by how young. Late 20s maybe. His face had the particular expression of someone who had believed in the legitimacy of what he was doing and had just been presented with information that complicated that belief. "Ask him," she said again, this time to the operator directly. Section 9, Paragraph 4 of the Meridian DoD contract. What does unauthorized civilian detention in a non-designated operational area do to the non-interference clause? The operator's expression shifted. She watched it happen, the internal calculation, the arrival at a number he didn't like. "It voids it," he said quietly. "It voids it," she confirmed, "which means you have no legal protection and a military witness to an illegal operation." She held up the radio with the code on its display. Or you enter this code and stand down voluntarily. The abort signal goes to your collection vehicle, and the investigation that follows is about corporate malfeasance, not criminal military action. The security personnel were still holding their weapons. Last time, Emily said, and her voice had gone to something very flat and very final. Weapons on the ground. They looked at the operator. The operator looked at the transmitter. Then he stood up, slowly, and walked to the command terminal. The security personnel set their weapons in the snow. The operator entered the code. For 2 seconds, nothing happened. Then the amber status indicator on the transmitter panel went green, and the red one went dark. Emily held her position, weapon up, and listened to the sound of the operation coming apart. The amber light went green at 19:23 hours. For exactly 3 seconds, nothing else happened. The courtyard was silent except for the wind and the low electrical hum of the equipment rack. The operator stood at the terminal with his hands at his sides, looking at the panel with the expression of a man who has just done something he cannot undo and is not yet certain how he feels about it. Then the status indicators cascaded, green down the panel, one by one, like dominoes falling in slow motion. The satellite uplink disconnected. The relay amplifier cycled down with a descending electronic whine. The antenna dish on the transmitter truck rotated 2 degrees east and stopped. A default park position, automatic on shutdown. The operation was over. Emily kept her rifle up and her eyes on the 2 security personnel. They were still in the snow where they had put their weapons. Neither of them had moved. The younger one, barely 25, she thought, with the confused expression of someone who had signed a contract and followed orders and arrived at a situation he had not been briefed to expect, was looking at his boots. The older one was watching her with a flat, professional assessment of a man calculating odds and finding them unfavorable. "You," she said to the operator, "on the radio, tell your collection vehicle the operation is suspended, verbally, now." He hesitated. "The code already transmitted," she said. "The automatic abort is already in progress. What I'm asking for is a direct voice order so there is no ambiguity about intent. Do it." He picked up the radio handset from the equipment table. His hand was steady, she noted. Whatever else he was, he had discipline. He keyed the handset and spoke 2 sentences in the flat, precise cadence of someone reading from a protocol card. She did not hear the response, but she watched his face. When the tension in his jaw released, fractionally, just enough, she knew the collection vehicle had acknowledged. "Step back from the table," she said. "Sit down against the south wall, all 3 of you." They complied. She moved to the equipment rack and examined it quickly, committing the configuration to memory. Serial numbers on the relay amplifier, the satellite uplink's registration ID on its faceplate, the laptop screens. She did not touch them, but she read what was visible on the nearest display. A coordinate grid, timestamp logs, a column of entries labeled Asset Routing that she photographed with her wrist camera before the screen dimmed to standby. Evidence. The contractor's documentation had gone to 4 recipients. What she was doing now would go into her official after-action report, which would go into a chain of record that was harder to close than a satellite channel. She stepped back to the courtyard entrance and keyed her radio. "Holt, the northwest approach is clear. The collection vehicle at the gulch exit has been stood down. Get your 2 soldiers back and start moving the people in the gulch into the aid station. Prioritize hypothermia assessment. They have been in that terrain for a significant period." Holt's voice came back immediately, tight with relief he was trying to professionalize. "Copy, Carter. Moving." She looked at the sky. Full dark had settled over the village. The storm had receded to a steady, manageable snowfall, the kind that would have been peaceful in a different context. The stars were not visible, but the cloud layer had thinned enough that the moonlight diffused through it, giving the snow a faint luminescence that made the darkness navigable. Somewhere out there, the contractor was still watching, And somewhere out there, his colleague, the shooter, was still in position. She was not done. She heard the shot before she understood where it had come from. It was not directed at her. The round hit the equipment rack behind her, a single, precise impact that destroyed the relay amplifier's control module with a shower of component fragments and a sharp electrical crack. She dropped immediately below the courtyard wall and heard two more rounds in rapid succession. The laptop screens, both of them, destroyed in sequence. From the northeast, high angle, elevated position. The shooter. He was not covering the courtyard. He was sanitizing it. "Get down," she said to the three men against the south wall. They were already flat. The older security contractor had pulled his knees to his chest and put his arms over his head with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been shot at before and knew the difference between cover and concealment. "Stay against that wall. Do not move." She moved to the eastern edge of the courtyard and looked northeast through her scope. The ridgeline. She had dismissed it for hours as a decoy. Too obvious, the wrong wind angle for the shot on Yates. But the shot on Yates had not come from the ridgeline. It had come from the northeast tree line, much closer, at an angle she had been reading wrong because she had been anchored to the ridgeline as the primary threat. The shooter had used her own analytical assumption against her. From the ridgeline, at this angle, with darkness in a thermal optic, he had a direct line to the courtyard. He had been waiting, holding his position while the transmitter was active, because shooting while the operation was running served no purpose. The moment the abort code went in, the moment the operation ended, he had begun destroying the evidence. Not to protect Meridian. The contractor had said his colleague was managing the refugee routes, protecting civilians from Meridian's corridors. So why was he destroying the equipment? She thought about it for exactly 2 seconds before the answer arrived. Because the documentation is already transmitted, because 4 recipients have it, because the physical equipment is now a liability, Meridian will claim it was unauthorized, operated by a rogue element, and point to it as evidence of contractor malfeasance rather than corporate policy. Destroy the equipment and the investigation focuses on conduct rather than infrastructure. The corporation survives. The contract survives. The people who authorize this survive. He was not working with the contractor. He never had been. The 2-position message had been true. 2 positions, 1 fires, 1 watches. But the contractor had interpreted it as a team. It was not a team. It was a competition. 1 position trying to expose Meridian. 1 position trying to ensure Meridian's operation completed cleanly and its evidence disappeared. "Carter," the contractor's voice. Close. He had moved from the residential building corner, was somewhere near the courtyard's northern wall. "The shooter," she said. "He's not yours." A pause that confirmed it. "I became aware of this," the contractor said carefully, "approximately 40 minutes ago." "When you transmitted the documentation?" "Yes, the transmission triggered a response protocol I was not expecting." His voice was controlled, but she could hear something underneath it. Not quite alarm, but its professional equivalent. "He is not Meridian's security. He is Meridian's recovery asset. His function is not to stop the operation from being exposed. His function is to ensure that the physical evidence does not survive the exposure." "So the investigation has testimony and records, but no hardware." "Correct." She looked at the destroyed equipment rack. The relay amplifier was gone. Both laptops were gone. The satellite uplink had taken a fragment from the second laptop shot, and its casing was cracked, probably non-functional. The transmitter truck was intact. "The truck," she said. "He hasn't hit the truck." "The antenna is standard commercial manufacture, available in 17 countries. It proves nothing about Meridian specifically." A pause. "But the command terminal inside the truck, the interface unit, it has Meridian's proprietary software loaded, serial numbers, configuration files that can be traced." He knows that. Yes. He's going to hit the truck. Yes, the contractor said, and I cannot stop him from my current position. The angle from the ridgeline covers the truck directly. Anything I do from the north exposes me to his sightline. Emily looked at the truck, 12 meters from her current position. The ridgeline where the shooter was operating was approximately 280 meters to the northeast. The truck was a large target. He would not miss it. He was waiting, she realized, because there was a person near it. Her. He was waiting for her to move clear before he destroyed the last piece of physical evidence that could sink Meridian's contract rather than merely suspend it. He was, in his own way, being professional about it. She did not move clear. She moved toward the truck. She did it without deciding to. That was not quite accurate. She decided, but the decision happened below the level of deliberation, in the part of her that processed tactical geometry faster than language. She was moving toward the truck before the conscious version of the choice had fully articulated itself. If I'm between him and the truck, he waits. Every second he waits is a second the documentation is more deeply embedded in 4 separate systems. Every second he waits is a second Holt's people are pulling refugees out of the gulch. Every second he waits is a second the operation is more irreversibly over. She reached the truck and put her back against its driver's side panel. The shot would have to come through her. She was aware this was an extreme thing to do. She was also aware that it was working. No rounds had come. He would not shoot through her. Whatever his operational mandate, killing a uniformed U.S. Army soldier was a category of action with consequences that no corporate protection clause could manage. He was recalculating. She used the recalculation. "Jack," she said into the radio, "I need you on the line, right now." Static. Then, "I'm here. Carter, what's your status?" Transmitter truck. "I'm using myself as cover for the evidence terminal. Shooter on the ridgeline at approximately 280 northeast. He's a Meridian recovery asset. His job is to destroy the hardware. I need you to hear what I'm about to do and log it officially." A beat. "Carter." "Log it, Jack. That's all I need." A pause. She could hear him breathing, could hear the specific quality of that breath, the controlled steadiness of a man who understood what she was doing and was doing the only thing left to him, which was bearing witness to it. "Logging," he said quietly. "Time is 19:38 hours. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter, U.S. Army Special Operations, reporting from Miroshka Village, Alaska." "Go ahead, Carter." She began to talk. She described the courtyard, the equipment, the operator and the abort code, and the cascade of green lights, the collection vehicle at the gulch and its acknowledgement of the stand-down, the refugees in the drainage gulch and Holt's soldiers moving to extract them. She described Meridian Resource Group's unauthorized operation, the mobile command transmitter, the geological survey equipment, the signal relay amplifier that was now in pieces. She described the documentation the contractor had transmitted to 4 recipients. She described the shooter on the ridgeline and his apparent mandate to destroy the physical evidence of Meridian's specific involvement. She described all of it in the flat, precise language of an after-action report because that was what it was, and she needed it to exist in Doyle's transmission log as an official record, time-stamped and voice-authenticated before anything else happened. It took 4 minutes and 11 seconds. When she finished, Doyle said, "Copy all, logged and transmitted to 3 recipients simultaneously." A pause. "Carter, get out from behind that truck." "When I'm ready." "You're ready now. The log exists. The record exists. Move." She looked at the ridgeline, 280 meters, full dark, but thermal optics work better in darkness than in daylight. He could see her clearly. He had been able to see her clearly the entire time she had been talking, her back against the truck panel, making herself impossible to shoot around. He had not moved. He was professional enough to understand that the window had closed. Whatever the record had not contained 10 minutes ago, it contained now. Destroying the truck's terminal would confirm what the documentation alleged rather than undercut it. He was running the same calculation she had run in the church when she had chosen not to fire at the watcher. The math of what served the mission and what served only the moment. She stepped away from the truck. She moved to the courtyard's north wall, using it as cover, and settled into a position with sightlines northeast. 280 meters, full dark. Wind from the northwest at 11 miles per hour. Steady now, the storm's final breath organizing itself into something predictable. She began calculating. She gave herself 3 minutes. This was not impatience. 3 minutes was the outside edge of how long she could maintain optimal trigger discipline in her current physical state. Cold hands, elevated heart rate from the movement, and the stress of the past hours. The particular fatigue that accumulated not from physical exertion, but from sustained tactical vigilance. Beyond 3 minutes, her performance would degrade in ways too small to feel, but large enough to matter at 280 meters. She worked the problem. Wind, 11 miles per hour from the northwest. Steady, predictable. The gusts that had characterized the storm's peak had organized themselves into a consistent stream. At 280 meters with her current ammunition, the windage correction was approximately 6 inches right. Elevation. The ridgeline sat approximately 40 meters above the village floor. The angle of inclination was roughly 8 degrees. At this distance, the elevation correction was modest, less than 2 inches of adjustment, but it had to be precise. Shooting uphill at night with a fatigued trigger hand was exactly the kind of scenario where imprecision crept in. Target. She did not know his exact position. She knew the general area, the ridgeline, the section that had the angle on the courtyard. She knew he had fired 3 shots in rapid sequence, meaning he was on a semi-automatic platform. She knew he had thermal and that he was stationary. Stationary shooters left heat traces in cold terrain that accumulated over time, making them progressively easier to locate on thermal optics. She dialed her own thermal to maximum sensitivity and scanned the ridgeline. There, a concentrated heat signature in the snow at the ridgeline's eastern end, behind what appeared to be a rock outcropping. The signature had the specific shape of a prone human torso, wider at the shoulders, narrowing toward the feet, with the slightly elevated temperature of a person who had been holding still long enough for their body heat to pool beneath them in the snowpack. He was prone, oriented toward the courtyard, approximately 12 feet behind the rock. The rock gave him cover from the front. It did not give him cover from her current angle. She was northeast of his orientation, looking at him from a direction he was not covering. His mistake was the same one she had almost made in the church. He had been watching one direction for so long that he had stopped fully accounting for the others. She settled her scope on the heat signature, made her final adjustments, windage, elevation, the slight compensation for the thermal scope's parallax offset at this distance. She found her natural respiratory pause, the space between exhales where the body is momentarily still and the world reduces to the distance between the crosshairs and the target. She waited for the wind to reach its consistent baseline, 11 miles per hour. Steady. She fired. The shot left the barrel with the suppressed crack of a round breaking the sound barrier, audible to anyone within 50 meters, inaudible at the ridgeline before the round arrived. She tracked through the scope in the half-second of travel time, watching the heat signature. The signature moved. Not the way a body moves when it falls, the way a body moves when it reacts. A sharp, involuntary flinch to the right, followed by a lateral scramble. She had hit the rock outcropping, not him. The round had impacted 2 inches left of her intended point. The wind had shifted a half-mile per hour in the final moments of the shot, enough to push it outside the kill zone. He was moving now, fast, breaking from his position toward the tree line. She was already cycling her next round, adjusting for the new movement vector. He was up and running, which meant he was fully exposed, no longer prone, no longer using the rock. A moving target at 280 meters in darkness was a significantly harder problem than a stationary one. She tracked him. His thermal signature moved northeast along the ridgeline at a sprint, heading for the tree line 40 meters behind his original position. She led the target 3 feet, accounting for his pace in the round's travel time, and fired. The signature stopped. Not a fall, a controlled stop. He had gone to ground in the snow, voluntarily, abandoning the sprint. He had read the shot vector. He knew she had his line. The ridgeline went still. 2 shooters, in the dark, 280 meters apart, both of them knowing exactly where the other was. The duel had begun in earnest. He moved first. She had expected patience. Counter-sniper doctrine taught patience above everything else, and he had demonstrated throughout the day that he understood the doctrine. But his operational window was closing. Every minute that passed was another minute of Doyle's transmission being received and logged and acted upon. Every minute was another refugee out of the gulch. Every minute reduced the value of whatever he could still accomplish. He moved, and she was ready for it. His thermal signature shifted left, a slow crawl toward the ridgeline's western end, where the terrain dropped into a shallow depression that would give him a new angle on the courtyard. She tracked the crawl, matching his pace with her scope, keeping the crosshairs 3 feet ahead of the signature's direction of travel. She did not fire. She waited. He would have to rise to clear the depression's far edge. Even 2 inches of elevation change required a shift in body position, a brief moment of maximum exposure where the torso came up and the thermal signature peaked before he settled into the new prone. She waited for the peak. He came up at 1951 hours. The thermal signature brightened, the full torso exposed for the half-second of position transition, exactly as she had calculated. She had already begun her trigger press. The round left the barrel in the same moment the signature peaked. 280 meters, 11 miles per hour from the northwest. The correction, 6 inches right, 1 inch low for elevation. She watched the thermal signature through the scope. It peaked. It fell. Not a controlled fall, not a lateral scramble. The involuntary, unorganized collapse of a central nervous system that has been interrupted. The signature hit the snow, and the outline of it blurred, the heat dispersing into the cold around it, the edges softening, the concentrated core of body temperature beginning the slow process of equalization with the environment. She held her position for 45 seconds. The signature did not move. She was not certain. At 280 meters, in darkness, with thermal, she could confirm that the target was down and stationary. She could not confirm the degree of incapacitation. She would not approach, not at night, not with a shooter who had demonstrated the discipline and skill she had observed today. She would hold and watch, and report, and let the official follow-up process determine what the ridgeline held when the light returned. She keyed her radio. "Jack, shooter on the ridgeline is down. I have a stationary thermal signature at approximately 280 northeast, ridgeline east end. Requesting official follow-up at first light." Doyle's voice came back steady. "Copy. Logged. 1952 hours." A pause. "Carter, I'm here. Are you hit?" She conducted a quick body check, methodical, the way she had been taught. Head to toe, looking for the delayed recognition of injury that sometimes came after sustained adrenaline. Her left shoulder was bruised from the timber debris in the church. Her left boot was wet, and her foot had gone from numb to the particular burning sensation that meant circulation was returning. Her hands were functional. Her face was stinging where the wood fragments had caught her. Nothing structural, nothing that required immediate intervention. "Negative," she said. "I'm operational." Another pause, longer. "Good," Doyle said, and that one word carried more than 30 years in it. The snow came back at 207 hours. Not the storm, that was done. This was the quiet snow that comes after a storm in the Alaskan interior. The slow and steady fall that is not weather, but atmosphere settling back into its natural state. It came down in large, soft flakes that caught the diffuse moonlight and made the village look almost peaceful. Almost. Yates' body was still in the evacuation corridor, covered now by one of the soldiers from the aid station, who had used a white tarpaulin to mark and protect it until recovery could be organized. The tarpaulin had collected 6 inches of new snow in the hours since. In another hour, it would be invisible. Emily stood in the courtyard and watched the snowfall. The 3 Meridian personnel were secured, zip-tied, sitting against the south wall, supervised by a soldier Holt had sent over when she reported the courtyard clear. The older security contractor had not spoken since his weapons went into the snow. The younger one had asked twice whether he would be permitted to put on an additional layer. She had said yes both times. The operator was watching the blank equipment rack with the expression of a man reviewing the decisions that had brought him to this specific wall, in this specific weather, in this specific set of circumstances. She did not have sympathy for him, but she had something else, the recognition that he was young, and that young people sometimes followed instructions into places that the instructions had not fully described, and that the system which had put him here was larger and more deliberately constructed than he had probably understood when he signed his contract. That recognition was not forgiveness, it was information. From the direction of the drainage gulch, she could hear voices, Holt's soldiers calling out, the sound of people moving through snow, a child crying in the particular way that meant cold and exhaustion rather than injury. The extraction was underway. She counted figures as they came into the aid station's light. 4, then 7, then 11. A woman who stopped at the threshold and looked back at the gulch for a long moment before stepping inside. A teenage boy being half carried by one of Holt's soldiers, his legs not cooperating fully. 31 people came out of the gulch in the first wave. Holt reported 9 more still in the approach corridor, moving slowly. All alive. 40. All 40. She stood in the snow and let that number settle into her. The official report would describe the mission as a successful, defensive overwatch operation. Refugee evacuation completed. 1 KIA, Specialist Yates, from hostile sniper fire. Hostile element neutralized. Unauthorized private contractor operation discovered and terminated per regulatory authority. Evidence collected and transmitted through official channels. Every word of that report would be true. None of it would fully describe what had happened in this village today. She thought about the corporate flags she had seen on Doyle's earlier satellite data, the Meridian logo on a document header, small and clean and institutional, the kind of visual identity that existed to suggest stability and legitimacy. She thought about the investigation that would follow, about the 4 recipients of the contractor's documentation, about the restricted manifest that had blocked Doyle's access, and the person above his level who had signed off on the non-interference interpretation. Investigations happen. Sometimes they produce consequences. Sometimes they produced findings that were classified and filed and retrieved only by people with access levels that most soldiers never achieved. She did not know which category this would fall into. She knew only what she had done today, what she had seen and recorded and reported, what she had put into a chain of record that existed now, regardless of what any investigation chose to do with it. The snow fell. The refugees moved toward warmth. She made herself go inside. The helicopter came at 0340 hours. A UH-60, running lights off, coming in from the southwest against the wind. Emily heard it before she saw it, the distinctive rotor sound dropping in register as it descended into the village's central clearing, kicking up a ground blizzard that whited out the area for 30 seconds and then settled. She walked out to meet it. The crew chief was a young sergeant who handed her a thermal bag without comment. Coffee, still hot, which meant they had refueled recently. She took it and held it with both hands and let the heat work its way through her gloves. Jack Doyle's voice came through her earpiece as the rotors idled down. "I see you're still vertical." "More or less. The Meridian personnel have been logged and are being transferred to federal custody. Your official report has been received and is currently generating a significant amount of uncomfortable conversation at several levels above mine." A pause. "The restricted manifest has been unsealed. 3 names on it. You'll be briefed when you're back." "The contractor," she said. "Do you have an ID?" "Working on it. Whoever he is, he did serious work for a long time before today. The documentation he transmitted is thorough. It goes back 14 months. A pause. "He's gone, by the way. No trace at the residential building or the tower. He packed out during the extraction." She had expected that. "His colleague on the ridgeline?" "Alive, hit in the right shoulder. He went about 400 meters into the tree line before he stopped. Your follow-up team found him at first light. He's being transported. He will talk, eventually." Doyle's voice was dry. "People with a bullet in their shoulder tend to reassess their loyalty to employers who left them in the field." She looked at the village, at the church with its leaning tower, at the courtyard where the equipment rack was a pile of component debris and the transmitter truck sat dark and still. At the drainage gulch, empty now, the last of the refugees processed and transferred to a forward aid facility 2 hours ago. The village was quiet again. The snow had stopped. "Jack," she said. "Yeah. You didn't follow the mission." A silence. "No," he said. "I didn't." Another silence. "Neither did you." She thought about how to respond to that, about what the right answer was, about Yates and the woman with the children and the 40 people in the gulch, and the boy with the bandaged hand who had looked back at the tree line and known something was following him and had kept walking anyway. "No," she said finally. "I finished it." A long pause. When Doyle spoke again, his voice had the quality she associated with him at his most honest. Stripped of the tactical precision, the professional calibration, all the layers that 30 years in the field accumulated around a person. "Get on the helicopter, Carter." She got on the helicopter. The briefing came 6 days later, a conference room at a base she had been to twice before, in a building that did not appear on any public directory. 3 people across the table from her, a civilian in a suit that cost more than her monthly pay, a colonel she did not know, and a woman from an agency she had worked with once in a different context who had not offered her name then and did not offer it now. They told her what had been in the restricted manifest. Meridian Resource Group had been operating in the Alaskan interior under a DoD advisory contract that had been approved 18 months earlier by an acquisitions office that was currently under separate investigation for contract irregularities. The non-interference clause had been inserted into the contract language by a legal review officer who had, it emerged, accepted consulting payments from a subsidiary of Meridian's parent corporation in the period immediately preceding the contract approval. The geological survey Meridian had been conducting was for rare earth elements. The specific site, Miroshka and its surrounding terrain, contained estimated deposits of significant strategic value. The survey results, had they been transmitted successfully before Emily destroyed the relay amplifier, would have formed the basis of an exclusive extraction rights claim under a provision of the DoD contract that had also been inserted by the same legal review officer. The refugees had not been incidental. They had been used. The humanitarian crisis that had generated the military response that had provided the operational cover, it had not been manufactured. The civilians who had caused it genuinely existed and had genuinely been displaced. But Meridian had been aware of the crisis before the military and had positioned its operation to exploit the response window. The people from the contractor's documentation were now in proceedings that the woman without a name described as ongoing and appropriately classified. Emily listened to all of it. When they finished, the colonel asked if she had questions. She had one. "The contractor," she said. "Who is he?" The three people across the table exchanged a look that contained a conversation she was not part of. "That information is not available at your current access level," the civilian said. She nodded. She had expected that too. She looked at the table. At the briefing materials with their careful language and their redacted sections, and their conclusions that were accurate as far as they went. She thought about the contractor, whoever he was, walking out of a dead village in the Alaskan dark with 19 days of documentation and no official identity. She thought about the 4 recipients of his transmission and whether any of them were in this room. She thought about what Doyle had told her once, early in their working relationship, in the particular tone he used for the things he meant most seriously. Every war has an official version and a true version. Your job is to operate in the space between them and make the true version matter. She had done that. Whether it would matter, whether the investigation would reach the people it needed to reach, whether the contract language would be unwound, whether the name of the legal review officer who had taken consulting payments would become public, whether Meridian would emerge from the proceedings intact or diminished, or transformed into something that wore a different name, she did not know. She would not know for a long time. She stood up from the table, thanked the colonel, and left. 3 weeks later, a different village, a different country. The terrain was not snow. It was dry and rocky, and the wind came from the east instead of the northwest, carrying dust instead of ice crystals. The temperature was 40 degrees warmer than Alaska. Everything else was the same. Emily Carter lay on a rooftop with her Mark 21 on its bipod and her scope aimed at a ridgeline, and her breathing in its slow 4-count cycle. Below her, a corridor. People moving through it, cautious, quick, guided by soldiers in the right kit. She watched each of them with the same cataloging attention she always brought. Movement speeds, stress responses, the way they scanned their surroundings, the way a 7-year-old girl, carried by her mother, looked up at the rooftop as they passed. Emily did not move. She was invisible. She was always invisible when she was working, but she looked back. Her radio clicked. Jack Doyle's voice, 1,200 miles away, coming through the static with the steadiness of a man who had been doing this for 30 years and intended to keep doing it. "You're up, Carter." "I'm up," she said. The wind came in from the east. She made the adjustment, and she watched.